those after work. When I run after work events, people are like, oh, I wish it was a You can't win, but it's great. Hopefully this can be the first of many breakfasts over the year. I hope you like the food. And yeah, I'm really excited to have Rachel and Logan and Melissa here. I really love what they're doing. I think it's really progressive. There aren't many companies offering the things that they're doing. Rachel has a very unique lens that she's seen a lot of different businesses in the healthcare space and working B2B and B2C, and I think the combo of her lens and what Logan and Melissa bring will be a very unique offering here and experience, and I hope you have a great time and ask a lot of questions, and yeah, I'll leave it to you, Nadeem.
Like Antonio said, we'll keep this pretty informal, like we'd love some questions. I've kind of put some questions together to get the conversation going and try to make it flow, but again, folks, please don't be shy, questions at any time. For me, it's been an interesting 3 months at the ReFrame group, joining Antonio and the group here. And what I really enjoy is ReFrame is really tries to take a look at insurance in a different way and kind of take a look at like maybe some of the gaps that are offered in your maybe typical traditional benefits plan, and try to see where there are things or programs or systems that can really fill those gaps. Rachel, I'll start with you. Traditional benefit plans kind of cover big insurance pillars, life, disability. But when we look at the lives of employees today, what critical moments are we missing?
Great question. So, hey everybody, can everyone hear me in the back?
Yeah.
Yep. Amazing. And well, thank you so much for having us here today. So, maybe taking a step back, I'm Rachel Zimmer, the co-founder and CEO of a firm called Simple Ventures. And what we do is we basically look for really big opportunities that are missing in the Canadian market. We study successful models from around the world, and once we see real opportunity or gaps here, we partner with exceptional leaders to bring them to market. So, my background, I'm an ex-founder, scaled and sold the business, and I've been in venture for the last 10 or so years. I think to the question of what's missing and thinking from an HR benefit plan perspective, at Simple Ventures, we've probably spoken to over 100 HR leaders, and we dove into a number of different spaces, from disability to addiction to longevity. And I think the very loud feedback is, Canadians are getting squeezed from all different angles, so the sandwich generation is one big piece. And then the second is that there's a lot, being left to be desired by the public system. It's not a shocking or life-changing insight, but employers increasingly so are seeing the gap that they need to step in and make sure that there's presenteeism and people are actually able to give their best selves and come to work. So that's kind of the broader piece. Maybe the second point I would just make on it is, Canadians want to get everything they can for free out of the system. Then and only then are they, looking to their employer benefits, and they're trying to get everything they can out of that. And then and only then are they looking and open to think privately. And so I think one of the hardest parts of building in health in Canada is, how do you find an ROI within the payer? Like, how do you make sure that for the employer, the ROI is tight, or if it's the consumer, that they see the value there. So I think, that's maybe one big insight from building in Canada, where that's quite different from other markets.
Maybe I can just dive in a little bit on that ROI question. I think for employers in the room, that question always comes, especially from an HR perspective, when you go to your finance team. Okay, but if I'm going to do this, what's the ROI? How do we help maybe non-HR folks prove that ROI? Do you have any tips or tricks or anything that you've seen with some of the companies that you've seen do that successfully?
Many, but I feel like Kindly is maybe a great example of one, because, and maybe I'll tee it up with, we have tested a lot of concepts, and it's hard to find that ROI. Like, longevity is a really hot topic right now, going to get blood work or DEXA scans, and that ROI is a really hard one to crack. I think there's a lot of reasons why we want to be doing things in preventative health, but that's a harder one to measure. Whereas something like Kindly, there was very loud feedback from the market that it was a very clear ROI. So, tee it up.
Yeah, just for context, in terms of what Simple Ventures does, and kind of Mel and I, so we're portfolio companies within the venture firm, so they've invested in us. But as part of the program, we actually consult with them, validating these different ideas. And so I just want to double down on that. I think it's such a cool opportunity for folks like Mel and I, because they spend, how long do you typically take on an idea? It can be
The longest we've done is 15 months.
15 months.
But our average is 6 months.
When I joined Simple Ventures, we were looking at this concept around elder care, and we were looking at some pretty interesting demographic data around just aging in general. And the main data point is about 25% of the population is going to be over the age of 65 in the next 3 to 4 years. So now what we're starting to see is a ton of investment going on to the space to support this demographic shift. And globally, there's been a ton of new companies coming up in the UK and the US. So what Kindly does, and I guess just a quick intro on mine, I'm Logan, I'm based in Vancouver, just live in East Van, 10 minutes away. I've been in HR tech for about 12 years now, so I've always sold into HR generally, working for a variety of different organizations, Visier being one of them, and most recently talent acquisition. My wife also works in HR, so it's just kind of part of the day-to-day.
You got the tattoo.
Yeah, HR, really. I just kind of fell into it, but what Kindly actually does, so we're a family aging and caregiving platform. And when we started looking at the concept, we actually thought, okay, is this a consumer play or is this a business-to-business play? And what we found was, after talking to probably, I mean, you guys may have talked to 100, we probably talked to like over 200 now of HR leaders across the country, ranging from small startup HR leaders all the way to like CHROs at TD Bank. And the thing that we found was caregiving was a very emerging topic. And when you speak to benefit consultancies, that was also something that was kind of like the new hot topic that's coming up, because caregiving, although is a very hidden thing that happens when you go through a family aging event, you don't really talk to your employer about it, but more and more examples are coming up where people were on short-term disability or leaving their employer to navigate aging for their family. And so to the question around how do you fit into insurance, I think one thing that we found early on that was really interesting was we actually can leverage existing insurance products. So for example, paramedical and mental health, we fit into that as a team of registered social workers doing care navigation. And so when we work with HR leaders, we can actually be a flexible offering for their employees to help them navigate the aging process. And there's a ton of other stuff we do, but does that answer the question?
And ROI.
Oh, ROI, right, sorry. So being in sales, I try to look at this in kind of 2 ways. You don't want to drown HR leaders with a bunch of ROI data, and oftentimes we actually led with that, and they kind of just said, whoa, take a step back. It was actually more of an emotional conversation, because almost every HR leader we spoke to had gone through their own family aging situation. But your question was about outside of the HR buyer, and so what we have actually done, serendipitously actually, is employees of companies that we're selling to. One example would be Clio, a great legal company here in Vancouver, is they started reaching out to us because of our marketing on LinkedIn. Employees would come to us and say, hey, I've gone through this myself. I'd love to sponsor you to bring you to our HR team. And so we actually did this hack where we would give employees, a couple of employees at the company, free access, and we take them through the full journey of how we can support them. And naturally what happened was, as a result, they would go to HR and say, hey, I've had this amazing experience. I have a testimonial and an example. I'd love for you guys to look at them and bring us in. And having that internal champion made all the difference for us when bringing this to new companies.
That's amazing. That's a really, I was getting choked up even thinking about it. It is very personal, and it impacts Canadians, well, everyone in the world in terms of with aging parents. So that's amazing. Maybe going to Mel, to Melissa, and on the postpartum care. Can you maybe speak about Alma Care and kind of what you're doing there and the support that you're bringing to Canadians?
Yeah, absolutely. So, hi everyone, Melissa Gallagher, co-founder and CEO of Alma Care. I started my journey as a new mom. I had just taken lead from Canopy Growth, which was at the time a very exciting and large Canadian organization, and was given 4 days mat leave and zero support in terms of navigating what would be next as part of a new mom within the organization. I did not return to Canopy Growth after that, and started to feel firsthand the gap in postpartum care. So both, not understanding how to navigate it through the public system. I mean, there is no navigating it. It's you have the baby, and then 6 weeks later in Ontario, you go back and you see your doctor, who sees you for 10 minutes and sends you on your way. So that's what postpartum care looks like, specifically in Ontario, and not too dissimilar across the country. So try to understand exactly where we can fill that gap. And there's so much that goes into that. Nearly 1 in 4 women experience postpartum depression to varying degrees. Some that can end in psychosis or worse. And there is no real understanding of how to navigate that or how to prevent that when there are very simple things that can be put in place to do so. It is an extremely stressful time for families, both parents in becoming pregnant, getting pregnant, becoming pregnant, and then raising your children. And there are simple ways that we can support them. We know that by putting strong care in place, that women are 60% less likely to experience postpartum depression, which obviously has major ripple effects on their immediate family, as well as the organizations that they're a part of, include their places of work. So that's the gap that we're looking to address, and we are addressing. We see a massive shift. We do track the mental health of our families that come into the work that we do, and we do see a massive shift in their mental health in a positive way after starting care with us. So we're really proud of the work that we're doing. The work that we do is actually sending professionals into the homes of families after giving birth to provide them with hands-on support for both mom and baby. We do that through certified postpartum doulas, internationally trained nurses, registered nurses. Many of them are benefits eligible caregivers. And we really do skew that way for a number of reasons. Obviously, access is a big part of that, and making sure that families who otherwise wouldn't or couldn't pay out of pocket, again, to Rachel's point, in Canada, you look to public system first, paid by employer, and then maybe think about investing in it yourself. So we're working to increase access through employer benefits, and that's why we use many certified professionals, in addition to obviously their incredible caregivers. So that's the work that we provide. We also, offer access and guidance to parents to help understand what to expect through this. So even if you, can't afford it, your employer isn't going to cover it, simply providing resources to families to understand what to expect, even that alone is a major gap. Many families, like Logan's due in a month and a half, so many families are, look at him, very surprised by what comes after baby arrives, specifically for the birthing parent and the transition into parenthood. So just providing resources and helping them expect, understand what to expect is a big part of it. So that's what we do. And from an employer perspective and benefits perspective, again, we're looking to increase access. The way that we do that is by leveraging, in most cases, existing benefits. So looking to the expanded benefits plans, the HSAs, leveraging those so that families can, again, gain access to this care.
So maybe let me ask a question. And you've tailored, like both of you have tailored your programs to work with the traditional benefit plans. If you could wave a magic wand, what would you do to those traditional benefit plans to really be there to support what you're doing instead of the other way around?
I have an answer, ready to go. So,
we've got this on the health plan. We've got this, but what could, you've got some insurance professionals,
yeah.
How could we support your program so that Canadians actually get access to this?
Yeah, so one of the major unlocks for families is a benefit provider called Carrot or Maven, which has come to Canada. They actually recognize the postpartum period as a period that needs to be supported. So I think that first recognizing that postpartum is something that needs to be supported for families is the first step. If you look at Carrot, this is best in class. Obviously the social system in the US is different, and that's why it's set up this way, but they provide 6 weeks of very intensive care through certified postpartum doulas, so they're certified by a governing body, and the family receives approximately $30,000 worth of postpartum support. Now obviously the intention there is for the employees to go back to work after a short period of time, so it's very intensive. However, that structure is really important. That is kind of the best-in-class approach to providing care. It supports both parents. In many cases, it's the mom who's recovering, birthing parent recovering, but the partner who is also supporting, that mom and this new baby and is going through a new chapter themselves. So it has, double impact by providing this type of support to one of the employees. So, if I had a magic wand, recognizing the postpartum period, we do see Sunlight is the first Canadian provider that I've seen that offers certified postpartum care as a benefit. There are a few companies who offer it, but that is, they've recognized it. So for me, it's recognizing that period and actually offering things like certified postpartum doulas as part of that coverage.
Can I ask a follow-up question to that? I'm curious, when you talk about care and $30,000, who's paying for that? Is that the
Employer.
The employer's paying
Yeah.
$30,000 per employee out of pocket as an
Yeah.
insurance product, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. So I think my answer is a bit different. I mean, I think it depends. You can look at it from like the innovation side, where as a new company in the market, you're trying to actually almost compete with the insurance companies because they're relatively slow and they can't innovate as fast as a small company like we can. On the other side, they offer insurance coverage, and so you want to try to, yes, fit into it, but you also want to push them from a policy perspective to offer better certified professionals. So one thing that we learned early on was that registered social workers, if they had their bachelor's or master's, are actually covered under existing insurance products. And so we kind of built our business around that model so that we could fit into HR. But taking a step back, I think one thing that's a really prevalent trend is home care. There's not enough beds that are available when something happens. And this is specifically for the public system. So if a loved one had a fall, they're going to be triaged, and depending on the severity, they may or may not get a bed. But we take cases all the time where there's a family and the loved one is just staying in the hospital until they can find a bed. That's a reality. And so what I'm saying now is that home care is a very popular thing. A lot of new companies, a lot of M&A happening. I would say for us, specifically insurance companies being able to cover home care for families would be a huge shift in the market for us, and families needing care at home because there's literally nowhere else they can go.
I recall, this is going back in my early days, there were some long-term care products out there in the market. I don't see them anymore. So maybe it's time that there's some insurance companies in the room, so I'm throwing the darts at them without looking at them as thoughts of kind of new products and trying to, I guess, catch up on that innovation side.
Sorry, I'll add one more thing.
Please.
So the other thing I would add is within the existing benefits, there are specific call-outs that prevent people from accessing preventative care. So I think removing those call-outs, so I'll use registered nurses as an example. So registered nurses, there are many insurance providers offer, $10,000, $20,000 worth of registered out of hospital or private duty nursing. But then there are many, there's the fine print that basically does not allow people from using it from preventative care. So it's really just, crisis management. So even just that, if we're all in the same mind space that we want to be on the preventative side, and that there are these professionals who provide this care, I think just being able to write that, to remove that from existing benefits, would make a big difference as well.
There are a lot of HR folks in the room today, some from larger employers, some from smaller employers. Is there some advice or something that they could take away as they go back to their office that you would say, hey, think about this, think about whatever that they could do for their employees and for their folks at their organizations?
I can maybe start, which is after speaking to a bunch of HR leaders through some of our research, it was clear sometimes there was a pulse on the employee population, right? Like sometimes it was qualitative. And there were only a handful of organizations that really had done like a quant poll of understanding how many employees are in this caregiving squeeze, how many folks are in the family planning phase. And so I think maybe just having the pulse in your employee population to figure out like what are the things that folks really care about, and then based on that, how do you adjust your approach? And I think data is a great example of Alma. I may be happy to share it, but it's a great example of a Canadian darling company that basically did this work and was like, oh wow, everyone's having babies, got it, let's do something with Alma. So you can speak to that.
Yeah, exactly. So, to layer on that, I think it's very stressful to talk to your employer about what's going on personally. You want to, appear as though that is your first and only priority, and whatever's going on behind the scenes is not. And I think that we have to create a culture where it's all blended, and people should feel comfortable talking about where they're at in their personal journeys, whether that's building a family or supporting their elders. I think that's just culturally something that needs to shift. I think it is, which is wonderful, but we still have a long way to go. And we have seen organizations, to Rachel's point, like Ada, who, 25% of their population, their employee population had babies last year. They're like, this is amazing, and they want to celebrate that. So they've partnered with us to leverage their existing benefits. They've worked with us to understand exactly how do we put together the puzzle pieces to create, an offering that already exists, but help them navigate it. Don't make it something scary for them to ask about. Put it at the forefront of what you offer and make them feel comfortable and celebrated for this part of their personal journey. So that was something, very simple that we were able to work with them on.
I think there's two other things as well I'd love to mention. So the other side of it is like for an HR person, I get this a lot. I spoke to TV's employee wellness person last week. Obviously you're bombarded with hundreds of different service providers. Me and Mel knocking on your door. You have childcare, backup care, you have RSSP matching. It's probably really challenging for HR leaders to navigate all of these different vendors. And so I think there's kind of two takeaways that I've learned anyway. One is, I think, Canadian first. If you're working for a Canadian company, try to be focused on supporting Canadian businesses, because we see a lot of American companies coming in, and I think it's important to just have that lens when you're looking at different vendors. The second thing is being open to be flexible. I think on our end, like oftentimes, you think there's a lot of rigidness in how we can structure a partnership, but there's so much flexibility for companies like us to make it work for your employees. Starting with something as simple as an info session at no cost, all the way to let's actually put a program together that's flexible based on your budget. And oftentimes I feel like maybe HR leaders are a little bit less open to being flexible because they just assume that we're super rigid in our pricing model, for example. But that's often not the case. We have a lot of flexibility to make it work for all types of organizations.
You kind of mentioned the organization that you were helping that had 25% of their population going maternity leave or be blessed to have children. Do you have like a target type of employer that hey, this is exactly where I want to work, or where my services would really help, or is it can it be any Canadian employer?
For us, it's certainly any Canadian employer. I think if you want to attract this talent, like we've seen a shift, families, having kids later, women having kids later, they get into executive positions. If you want to continue to have women in executive positions, you need to support them through this phase of life, because they will have put this phase of life on hold so that they can get there. And when they get there, you better support them, otherwise they're gone. You get to an age when you're at that age of maturity and you recognize just how fulfilling it is to have a family. You're making that decision of, do I continue down this path of going to work for someone who's not going to support me when everything has changed, or have they supported me, and absolutely we're in this together, and I'm going to continue on that for the long haul.
And maybe for yourself, Logan?
I couldn't agree more with that, so I think I'll leave it. I think that was a really good point.
Maybe I'll open it up to some questions from the crowd. We wanted to make sure that we had time for that as well. Is there anyone that had any questions for the folks here? Please.
Yeah, I'm curious about what was your offerings if like the employee or the member of the company, if their partner has an aging parent, if it's like the in-laws, for example, or if it's like the dad,
The dad, yeah.
Is that what you offering to the partners as well through like the benefits, extended benefits?
Yeah, I mean, for us, yes, it is the way we look at it. As long as the caregiver is actually getting the support, we can help support them through their insurance. And then there's some nuance. For example, one case we took just 2 weeks ago, we realized that the employee of the company that we were supporting, because we're exclusive to that organization, had a cousin who was actually the primary caregiver. And so we transferred the case to the cousin and then started using their existing insurance within the company that we actually were working with, but we were flexible to make it work. In-laws as well, we've had families where the main caregiver had an in-law and they were involved in the caregiving, and so we supported them in that.
And yeah, absolutely. We see much of the insurance coverage that we actually see our families leveraging is through the non-birthing parents' work. Yeah. Yeah. It's so important. I talk to every family who comes through, and like their partner's taking 2 weeks off of work. That's not enough. That's not enough for like the birthing parent to recover. And that's 2 weeks of sleepless nights, and then you go back to work and you've got 3 more months of sleepless nights ahead of you. So you can understand that it's important for both parents.
3 months. That's not bad.
Under our program, it's 3 months.
I told her I was like to our bed last night, so that was another sleepless night.
I think we talked a little bit about ROI, but then I think Logan, you talked about, it's a softer conversation because it's a personal experience. Eventually it goes to the CFO. You have to show the ROI case. You're taking share of wallet. You're asking for funds. How are you getting to the number on the return on the investment?
Yeah, we have a good question. So fortunately, because typically within the larger companies we're speaking to, it doesn't even get to the CFO because the cost is relatively low compared to the P&Ls they're managing. So that's great for us because there's less process that we have to go through. But there's kind of 4 areas that we look at, which is absenteeism, turnover, retention is a massive one, although indirectly very hard to measure. So we're trying to model basically what we do is there's calculations online from the government statistics websites, and then we model if we can make, this is very conservative, a 10 to 15% improvement, this is the ROI to organization. And the numbers are dramatic, especially when looking at caregiving specifically, because another case I just spoke with last week, she was helping her mom, but she had to go help the moving company get everything in and out. Like you're literally leaving work for 4 to 5 hours at a time. Another example was someone I spoke to that left their job fully. So when you look at like a high performer leaving the company and not even informing the company of why they're leaving, that's like a big aspect of it. So absenteeism, turnover, retention, and then there's just like general logistical burden of like having to navigate all of these different things that we kind of bucket into one 4th category. It's a detailed calculator that we've built to provide. But I will say, although we provide it to them, oftentimes it's something that is such close to heart that they're just like, I get it, I've been through it, but we want our employees to have this support.
And similarly, and what we see actually is a lot of the families that we've worked with, the birthing parent is going back to work. So what we've seen just generally this trend of more parents taking 18 months leave, so extended from 12 to 18 months, and what we see with many of the families that we work with is, we see them going back sooner. So they're able to return back to work much sooner. I mean, we see often moms going back at 6 months. And that's not necessarily the goal, but they feel, excited and ready and able to do so.
I'll maybe speak to this idea of like lookalike markets and health. And one of the things we do at Simple Ventures is we look around the world and we say like, okay, what is much more mature in the UK, or what's much more mature in other markets that, Canada's maybe a few years behind. And I think one thing that's interesting about the caregiving and women's health, we are so far behind. Like if you look at other markets, they've already shown the productivity impact. They've already shown the ROI. So we basically study those models and say like, okay, what did that look like? And how do we make sure we keep the ethos of that impact as we bring it to the Canadian market? So it's not only, leveraging the data and understanding it locally, but it's looking at markets around the world and saying like, oh wow, women's health is provided in a massive, massive way in XYZ country. Why? It's probably not just, a frothy market. It's actually when you pull back the data and you look at whether it's like health studies or employer studies, there's really good impact.
And do you have those stats?
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. So I think like for both Alma and Kylie, like when we were partnering to bring both concepts to market, we had some phenomenal data from the UK on caregiving where you can see the impact for employees, and similarly with women's health. And there's so many different countries where, again, so far ahead. Europe was one big area we looked at, and then super interestingly, if anyone hasn't dove into what's happening in Asia with postpartum care, countries like Korea have like 80% of the population that has like full coverage for care in like a hotel hospitality type suite. So we definitely have the stats for both, and we could follow up with that and share that with the group. But I think it's definitely something to look at.
So you both are kind of at the very vast ends of the spectrum, like birth and then like elder care. What is the impact, or have you taken the impact of the sociocultural norms? Like, I don't have much of a tribe. My parents live in Kelowna. My mother-in-law is in North End, taking care of my brother-in-law and their kids more. So we're just kind of on an island on our own. So is that taking into implication as how you design your services for people who don't have that support network close by to help out with that?
Absolutely, with Alma Care, I mean, that's a big, again, I speak to these families every day, and all of them, and many of them don't have, they're first generation Canadians who don't have, not even someone who's like a flight or a drive, like a, short flight or a drive away. They're really, these are people who live on the other side of the world. So they're first generation and they don't have support, and it's culturally normal to have support. So they're actually driving, this demand and the shift, because they're going, this is crazy. I landed here and all of a sudden I just learned, I'm pregnant, and I just learned that you guys don't do anything for us. So we're seeing a lot of that. And it's creating, for us, it's creating that ecosystem and that support that otherwise would exist if they lived back in Asia or other parts of the world.
Yeah, for us in our intakes, we have cultural specific questions to help match just a better experience. So one example is when we think about assisted living facilities, because a big part of what we do is actually help families, okay, I've had a crisis, I need to move into an assisted living facility. Within that ecosystem, there's a lot of hidden data in terms of being able to find these options. And so a part of our product has actually been being able to export all that data, build a marketplace, and then be able to support the family with these different options for them. On the logistical piece you mentioned in terms of location, just a case this weekend that we took, it was a gentleman living here in Vancouver, family in Nova Scotia. And so we have a care team that's located in each province. And so within our internal team, we actually support one another. In examples like that, we'll have a social worker working here in Vancouver for the caregiver, and then we'll liaison with our team in Nova Scotia to make sure that they have all the supports available based on the local nuances, because every province has a different public system, different insurance coverage. It's very, very nuanced, so we make sure we cover that as part of the model. Good question.
I found it interesting what you said about women kind of having children later, and then if you're maybe at a higher point in their career, and that the extra challenges that come with that. So I'm wondering too about if the products or the services that you provide can also be expanded. When you're looking at perimenopause and menopause, the lack of supports around that for women's health, particularly again, you're at a higher point in your career, and how does that, is that something that could also be supported, and how would you do that, I guess,
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think I'll probably give it to Rachel, because I know that she's gone deep in this space as well. For us specifically, yes, absolutely. And our goal is to work with other trusted providers to be able to help transition into that phase. I'm intently focused on postpartum because there is such a massive, massive gap. And it has such a big impact. But I know, yes, they need to be supported through the next chapter, which I know Rachel's done a lot of exploration on.
So generally, if there's any HR leaders here and you're like, oh, I wish there was a suggestion box I could put ideas into. Great companies think of us as a suggestion box, like reach out. We've spent quite a bit of time looking at different spaces. So I mentioned like addiction, longevity, and then menopause is an area we spend a lot of time in. I think one challenge for creating a business, so separate from kind of the employer focused on helping the employee, is going back to that ROI. A challenge that we heard in a lot of the discovery we did was that you're kind of competing with primary care, and that's been a challenge for us, a lot of like keeping the ROI case tight. So we haven't, built anything out, but we've spent a lot of time doing it. There's a lot of really interesting players out there, like Coral, June, and we're rooting for them. But that was kind of the tough feedback that we heard from the market, or why we didn't pursue it.
Additional comment on that too, I think around focus, like obviously it naturally makes sense to potentially look at a menopause product. But I think one thing that we've learned in trying to cover all of these different use cases as these, we'll call them ancillary benefits, it's really challenging to actually provide value in ROI. Like we've been asked, hey, why don't you get into the childcare space? And I think this is a result of like why EAPs have not been adopted, is they're so generalized, you don't provide ongoing support over time, that there really isn't any value. When you look under the hood of what Alma's doing, what Kindly's doing, we're making massive impact to families. Like our NPS scores are out of the roof, and it's because we're so specialized in that one specific thing that we know we can do really well. And so staying true to that, I think, is hard, because you do have companies saying, hey, can you just bundle all of this stuff? But then you result in low adoption and ROI. So I think that's a point to just think about as we think about like trying to add all of these things all the time. It's hard. There's so many problems.
That's a great point, because something that we see at the ReFrame group is a lot of our plans will offer EAP. But when you actually look at the utilization of it, it's extremely low. And so there's no conversation around the ROI on that. Or we try to get a conversation going on the ROI of paying whatever it is, $4 per member per month, and try to get folks to use the services that are there. But this is a great example of where there is some ROI. Antonio?
Just to give a couple stats around like EAP usage for those of you who might not know. On average organizations, we might see like 4 to 8%. And if you're in a very large organization, you're seeing less than 2%, like in your thousands, 10,000 plus, maybe sometimes less than 1%. And so it's kind of like a service now that you need to check that box in case someone's there, but you can also pay per service on that and access. And one of my feelings is services like Alma Care and Kindly, employers are going to be looking for things that they can get immediate value and tangible results from. And I think services that are specialized and actually are really targeting a problem rather than saying, hey, we're all things to all people as an EAP service, but their model breaks if they try to be proactive. And so they've kind of priced themselves and commoditized that space. And so that's why a lot of EAP services, like I'll give you an example right now, we're battling one large EAP provider in the country that is pissing me off right now, to be honest. one of our clients, one of our clients, they're, not quite 1,000 employees, but they've been with them for a long time. They're not getting the greatest of service, and the client asked for a few workshops, and they are being forced to, hey, sign the next contract for the next year, or else we won't give those. And then they're also saying, okay, and then if we're going to give them, we're not going to give them for 4 weeks to 6 weeks, just a couple of workshops. And so that's kind of where EAP has gotten to in a lot of situations for us, unfortunately. Not all are created equal, obviously. There are some really good proactive providers out there, but I really feel strongly that services that employers are going to look at their population, like Renee, like they've got a really healthy, active workforce. So Renee's thoughtful in designing their plan around what their employees need. And so I think more HR leaders are going to be leaning to that way. Okay, this is my population. It's not for everyone, but Kindly really fits us. And so they're going to lean into that a bit more. My 2 cents.
It's such an interesting, I could talk about this forever, but just one more comment to add to your point, Antonio. Like talking to customers recently around EAP and ROI, one easy example is like, think of a mental health partnership with a therapist. I mean, you only get, 2 sessions with that therapist? And most of the EAPs are bundled into the insurance companies. So if you want to continue working with that person, you actually can't. That's all you get. And then you have to go through a different modal to get continued care. So I think that's another big breaking point for what we're doing is like you have one person that you're working with the entire journey. It's not this person and this person, this person. And as you know, these are emotional times. You don't want to share your story with 5 different providers. You just want one person to help you build that relationship on an ongoing basis. I think that's super important, but something we're not seeing with the APs.
Maybe I'll just throw one last thing, because everybody goes down to the ROI, and for years I've been, I feel like you just meet your people, and the people who don't get it and want to beat you over the head about ROI, they're probably not your people. And so I've come to realize, okay, well, this is just a struggle. You gotta, and not that there isn't, but they just, okay, well, how does this impact all these other metrics? So we've actually had one of our co-ops from Ivy spent about 80 hours and built out a wild modeling on all these different levers, and we're going to be posting that on our site so that HR leaders can use that, and companies like Kindly and Alma, and so you can input all these different metrics, tweak it all, and really get down to different impacts, and it's phenomenal. So that'll be available to everybody here soon.
Antonio, I'm actually curious, what's an average budget for extended health care on payroll or revenues, and what's an ideal?
Let's say right now, if you're just a full benefits plan, like health, dental, life, AD, like all the services, let's say $4,200 a year per, whether they're single, couple, family, on average, maybe. Now, it depends what industry, sector, size. There are a lot of different factors there, but let's say $350 on average per person. Now, obviously, that's highly dependent. Like if you're in a hyper-growth tech firm and you're competing and pulling talent from another firm, you're probably going to have a bit better plan. But that's a good kind of benchmark.
I have another question on ROIs. Because you were talking about, public funded and then employers and then individuals. We have an amazingly diverse workforce in Canada, and many people have come from cultures where they're paying for their services anyways. Is there like a value or an access point to have like a co or an independence from that side? You mentioned about speaking, kind of going in the back door and getting employees to root for your product, but is there a service or an option to kind of go that way?
When you say dependent, do you mean like having the employee out of pocket for our services? 100%. Yeah, and we'll actually try to fit into their existing insurance as a starting point, and then outside of that, we support them outside. And actually, our plans do exactly that. We'll use your insurance, and then ongoing, we'll fit into your outside of that.
And for us, we go direct to the families, so most families are paying out of pocket. We will then help navigate their insurance to see where they can leverage what exists to top that up.
Are employers interested in those statistics? Or when will they be?
Yeah, we're working with a third party right now to get like a more of a Canada-wide perspective and having some pretty significant companies sign off on this impact report. But I think generally, as I mentioned, ROI has only been a topic in probably 2 to 5 conversations out of 200 when it comes to the impact. Doesn't mean we shouldn't focus on it. I think it is really important, but it is definitely more of an emotional discussion for most of the conversations we've had.
Good question on onboarding. Someone said yes. What's the level of effort required kind of on the customer side to get that, right?
I love that question.
That's a funny question.
Yeah, it's also really interesting by the AI. So I think what we've learned is that organizations want a seamless onboarding. We have a full slide that says this is how much time it takes for you to onboard kindly. It is extremely low lift. Outside of the standard procurement and security stock requirements that we have, it takes less than a day for us to get on board. We just need the employee list. If you want us to set, we can set that up. And we own it all. We do the live info session for an hour, educating your employees. We'll actually offer that to Antonia's point around workshops. We'll do that any month you want. If you want a financial caregiving workshop, you want a financial specific workshop, we'll do that for your organization. And they can access us through a co-branded landing page. Using AI and onboarding wizard is seamless, right? So it's pretty cool what you can build now and with cloud structure, which we have. Good question.
Yeah.
Cool. Any other questions from the crowd as we start to wrap up our time? No?
Okay.
Awesome.
Can I put an ask out?
Please,
Okay.
that was actually going to be my next
Oh, okay,
next
sorry.
thing. No,
Sorry.
please do it. Yeah, please.
My ask is probably not what you're going to expect, but we're new to BC, so we've been operating in Ontario very successfully for the past couple of years, and are newer to offering in BC. I am really, really keen to be introduced to providers, so looking for those in maternal health and infant care space, so specifically registered nurses or nursing students who are in the space or interested in picking up work through us. It's non-medical work, but it's a passion project for many. So would love if anyone has any connections to providers. I would love an introduction.
There's a senior.
And that's interesting because throughout your speaking, I haven't really heard about the midwives. Once we are talking about maternity and primary care, and that's so interesting. I don't know, because it's what's developed in Ontario. I know that's totally a different story. But here in BC, midwives is providing the help, kind of maternity and primary care. At least involving in more than 40% of the birth in the province. And most recently, the midwives is really shifting to postpartum rather than intrapartum. So I was really curious, was that at all in kind of somewhere in your study, or in the client, in the provider, or how does that work?
Yeah, so midwives are interesting because of the funding for midwives, so it's a little bit of a different approach. Also because of the way that they're providing medical care, they're not providing proactive wellness, which is what we do. So it is a little bit different. So we love working alongside midwives and supporting families
Because many, they are right now moving toward having a dual certification, like consultation,
Yeah.
plus the kind of, midwifery license, and many of them, they are offering the postpartum like consultation to the
Yeah.
family. So,
Yeah, that type of care is very, very similar.
Logan, Rachel, any asks of the crowd before we wrap up?
I would say for us, just connect on LinkedIn, and we appreciate you liking our posts and following us along. I think we've added some great companies, Well Simple, Scoop the Dishes, Novia Capital, and so any following would be just greatly appreciated as we continue building here in Vancouver. And if you do work for a company and are interested in having a conversation, we'd love just to get your feedback on the products we're building anytime.
We'll also send a follow-up email to everyone and those who weren't able to make it, and we'll give you each of their contact details in the follow-up email.
We'll maybe wrap with beyond the suggestion box if there is a need to send it to, feel free to reach out to me on LinkedIn. I think there's a reason Canada's so far behind. It's not just structurally the payment piece. I think we've got a very risk-averse culture. We're slow to adopt, and so maybe my ask would just be the folks in the room, like, lean forward. And whether it's a Kindly or Alma or another benefit outside of this group, I think we've got a lot of work to do to better support employees. And so my ask would just be to take that responsibility forward and do what you can to help Canada close the gap versus a lot of other markets.
Awesome. Maybe with that, I'll wrap up and I'll say thank you for making the time this morning to come and present, and for the folks in the audience for taking the time out of your morning as well to come here and join us. I hope you enjoyed what you heard and saw today. And again, we'll be sending an email with contact info for any other further questions or follow-up, or hopefully some likes on LinkedIn and some following there as well. So with that, thank you.
Thank you.